Don't look now, Witney. There's a Dracula behind you.
Oh, that's Joey. He's good.
Oh, hi, Joe.
Whoa. Greetings, friends. Welcome back to Critically Acclaimed, the podcast where highbrow and lowbrow collide. Too much stream, not enough disaster.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Might have to fold in another explosion during your scream. This is a film review podcast. My name is Witney Seibold. I am a film critic for various places around the internet. Well, really just one place around the internet.
Lately.
And I don't have a cool nickname, but my charming co-host does.
And who is this person? Who is this charming, handsome devil?
Have you heard of this charming co-host?
Ooh.
They say the best roles to take are the ones that other characters talk about a lot.
That's true. That's true. I am the hairy lime of this podcast. Hey, everybody. My name is William Bibbiani. I, too, am a film critic for the internet. Everybody calls me Bibbs, and we got a fun episode for you this week. We got 3 surprisingly good movies coming out that are new releases. We're going to be reviewing A Quiet Place and Blockers and You Were Never Really Here. And because this is what we do, we're reviewing a film you voted on. And all throughout the month of April, rather than vote for the bad movie, you're picking the good movie. You picked one of the best movies of all time.
Yes.
And we picked a very, 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 very bad film.
Really quite bad.
It's not good.
Yeah.
It's rather bad.
I listed 2 of the actors on the social medias, and somebody came back and said, "Are you doing an Uwe Boll film?" No.
Yeah, it feels like it should be.
But you're close.
There's certain actors who, like, you're watching any movie, and you see that a certain character actor's in it, and you're like, oh, cool. Like, Udo Kier is in this.
That's no guarantee, but I like Udo Kier.
Yeah,
Who doesn't like Udo Kier?
So that's fun. And then you see Udo Kier and Tiny Lister. Oh, Tiny Lister. I like Tiny Lister. President from The Fifth Element.
Wait a minute. But Udo Kier and Tiny Lister.
And Coolio. And Casper Van Dien.
Casper Van Dien is the lead actor. You're in trouble.
We've entered trouble territory. This is not going to be good.
You've got trouble, my friends.
Like any one of them, you might still have a good movie. 2, maybe. 3 or more. This is going to be a bad scene, but it's going to be a fun episode.
Individually, they are not crap. Together, they are a crap tornado.
Crapnado actually does sound like the
Sci-Fi
Friedrich Seltzer parody
oh, God.
of the Sharknado series. Which, honestly, that I might be okay with.
Yeah,
I feel like that's actually punching up for them.
I really respect... Oh, I forgot their name. The maker of Big Ass Spider.
Mike Mendez.
Mike Mendez.
Yeah.
I remember his story about Big Ass Spider.
Yeah.
They said, "We want you to make this really crappy giant spider film for the Sci-Fi Channel." And he's like, "Great, I will do that, but I will only do it if you will let me rewrite the script for free." And they said, "Fine, if it's for free, whatever."
I believe that's the case. Yeah, he certainly said he needed to rewrite the script.
Yeah, or maybe he just rewrote what was there, or maybe he started fresh. I don't know the exact details.
He insisted on rewriting the script.
He insisted on rewriting it, and I think that's the way to go, because if you're going to make one of those crappy things, you may as well make it the way you want.
Yeah, Mike Mendez is not credited on that, but you can tell he had an influence, because Big Ass Spider, infinitely more clever than almost any other sci-fi original movie.
Yeah,
it's a real hoot. That film. I like that film a lot.
The unfortunate thing is...
I'm quoted on the DVD for that film.
Nice. Apart from the really rather bad Sharknado movies, they're all serious films.
I mean, they're taking themselves seriously.
Yeah,
they're acting like, even if it's something crazy like Aztec Rex or Dino Croc versus Megapython,
Sharktopus, or whatever you got. There's
always this air that
they're trying to make a legit monster movie.
I get the impression that the actors are hoping that this will be their breakout, and now I'm visible in something. But you see me actually selling this and being good, and I'm like, that's not why we're here. You're actually just hurting.
You want to see the dumb mayhem. Also, they made a movie called Lava-lantula.
Also, Mike Mendez.
When Tarantula was right in front of you.
Oh my God.
You idiots. Lavalantula? That doesn't even make any sense.
I love how you introduced us by praising Mike Mendez, and you ended it by making fun of Mike Mendez.
Well, because he made one good decision, he made one bad one, and I can criticize him for the one bad one.
Have you seen Lavalantula?
I've seen neither of those.
Oh, Big Ass Spider is great. Lavalantula, I haven't seen.
I'm just praising him for his decision to make it his.
All right, well, fair enough. Anyway, let's move on to some new release films, shall we?
Sure.
Now, the big release this weekend is, and it opened, I think, bigger than anyone expected it to. It was the big hit film. Is a horror movie called A Quiet Place, directed by John Krasinski of The Office fame.
And it feels like an M. Night Shyamalan premise in a lot of ways.
It does. It has that kind of high concept, but don't focus too much on the plot. Aspect of it. Like, that's what M. Night Shyamalan does with his better movies. He comes up with a really high concept. What if there was a train crash? Everyone died except one guy, and he's completely unscathed. Most storytellers would use that as like the launching pad for some really interesting narrative. He makes it a character piece.
Yeah.
A Quiet Place is I guess it's a sci-fi film. They never really explain where the creatures come from.
It's a post-apocalypse monster movie.
Yeah, monsters have attacked or invaded the Earth or crawled out from the core. We don't know where they come from.
They're monsters.
They're monsters, and they're everywhere.
And they're spindly, they're blind, they're impervious to bullets, and they can hear everything.
They have extremely heightened sense of hearing, and if you make any noise outside of like a whisper, they immediately pounce on you like a cat on a laser pointer and just rip you to shreds. And as a result, there aren't many people left, which it raises a lot of questions about how we got to apocalypse level with that. I feel like somewhere down the line, like some like military in a bunker could have come up with something, but
and it starts on like 3 months after these monsters have invaded, and there's there's survivors,
and we don't ask the question of how it got this bad, because honestly, once you start picking apart that carcass, you don't want to see how you don't want to see how the sausage gets made. You just want to get to the point where people are living in absolute silence, terrified of making any noise, or else basically the boogeyman will get them.
Yeah,
that's all we need. So we got John Krasinski, got Emily Blunt. They're married in real life. They're married in the film. They have a small family. They have a couple of kids. She's pregnant for most of the movie. And when you think about like, oh God, how's she going to give birth in this environment? they ask that question, they answer that question, and it's one of the best parts of the film. Ultimately, A Quiet Place doesn't have a lot of plot to it. It's just pure tension.
It's survival scenarios, some better than others. The one drama is that they have a deaf daughter who kind of resents just how bad things have gotten. She's their eldest, and she's just tired of the death. She's tired of living in fear, and the parents are a little bit more survivalist bent. She's just a little bit more, wants to live a little bit better, move on, do something different than just sort of live in fear the whole time. And that's kind of the only real tension of relationships, the only kind of real drama in the film.
Towards the beginning, they suffer a horrifying loss, and that starts pulling them apart as a family, too. But really, it's just a matter of... It's almost like a British movie about living in the Blitz, like Mrs. Miniver, where you try to have something resembling a normal life, and you try to, play games with your kids, but the second you do one thing wrong, you could all die.
Yeah.
And that just... mounting dread, mounting tension is something that John Krasinski handles incredibly well. I think a lot of credit also has to go to his cinematographer, Charlotte Bruce Christensen, who also shot Fences and The Hunt and Far From the Madding Crowd, really good-looking movies. And so much of this movie has to work visually. Yeah. You can't just shoot this movie. You have to tell the story visually, because there's some musical score, but honestly, a lot of the film takes place in relative silence.
It's like mostly ambient sound.
I love
it wasn't as quiet as I was hoping.
You were hoping for just silent movie.
Just totally silent. Like no sound at all.
But what happened? I don't think that would work, though, because you're waiting for those moments when any sound just punctures that and destroys it.
Then have those sounds.
Well, look at the opening of this movie. The opening of this movie it's about 90 days since the incident, whatever started this horrible nightmare. And we see an abandoned town, and we see John Krasinski's family foraging, going through pharmacies, doing everything that they can. And There's no music. There's some sound effects or some Foley, but everyone's trying to be as quiet as possible, so it might as well be silent. And I loved seeing this in a theater. We saw this in a theater. We didn't see this at a press screening. We saw this at a regular old theater. About like a third full, maybe. It was late at night.
Yeah.
You know, it's been doing real well, but this was not a sold out screening. And it was really interesting throughout this whole sequence how A Quiet Place trained the audience how to watch it. Because at first, the movie just starts playing, and you realized all of a sudden just how loud movie theaters are. There's people like just sort of whispering to each other just a little bit, and you'd never hear it in most movies because they're loud enough. Or people like playing with their popcorn or squeaking around in their seats. And over the course of this, I don't know, like 5-10 minute opening sequence, all that shit died down. People were just like, "Oh no, we're expecting. Oh, okay, what you got for us, Quiet Place?" And that was actually really kind of experimental and exciting.
Well, I mean, I've seen that many times before. When there's a quiet moment in a film where people just have to shut the hell up, they do.
My point is that they're teaching you to do this over the whole film, and there's not a lot of that.
There's, thinking back to The Silence of the Lambs, there's a scene at the end where Jodie Foster's character is lost in a dark room, and the killer can see her with night vision goggles, and she's wandering through the dark. Nobody's making a sound through that.
That's true. However, that's later in the film after we've already established character and we're already super invested in the material. This is right off the bat. You don't know anything about it.
Okay.
You probably only know the basic premise.
Yeah.
So I think just as in terms of just telling a story through sound and specifically silence and using that to just basically prime everyone constantly for a boo scare. Any noise will work as a boo scare. In this film,
the biggest reactions were from things that weren't creatures.
Yeah,
like somebody just sort of trips and makes a big noise, and that's it.
Well, yeah, because you know that could bring the creature, so you get like this double jump scare, which is a really like just the premise of the movie and how well it is put on screen. To his credit, by John Krasinski, that's a really fun time at the movies.
It's conducive to cinema.
Yeah.
It's just super cinematic and it's really effective. And there's not much you can really say beyond that. It's just sort of, it's a novel thought, and the little set pieces are thought out very well. That they throw a pregnant woman into the mix is really nice. There are a few comments on the notion of like the paterfamilias, how like we're going back to the man being the head of the household and he's the hunter, whereas the woman is now the domestic, and how
both the women are expected to stay home while the men go
exactly.
Get food.
So
that happens,
there's a little bit of how we have to go back to an earlier version of the nuclear family in order to survive once again,
or do we?
Or do we?
Is the question I think the movie asks.
But that it's definitely on there. You think back to sort of the agrarian period of human history and how sort of the way we think of the family unit from then, and how were we to return to sort of an agrarian period, we'd have to go back to that kind of family dynamic.
Well, I think
that is floating around in there very lightly, but it's not really necessarily the center theme of the movie.
Does the movie really have a proper theme other than sort of questioning that sort of male-led family, the paterfamilias, not to use your extremely expensive word.
Cost me $14, that one.
Yeah, no, but like seriously, like is there, I mean, other than, because I look at this mostly as a genre exercise and sort of a filmmaking exercise. Can we make a movie this way? Can we tell it well enough that it will be effective and dynamic, and can it carry an entire movie? And I think the answer to all those questions is yes. I think it's very well shot. I think the sound design is incredible. The cast sells everything they need to sell, and I enjoyed the entire experience
until the very last scene where they just sort of gave up and thought, well, we're just going to do the big thing, and it's not creative or interesting at all. And it becomes really sort of mechanics driven, it's just I don't want to say what happens because I can't give away the ending, but it decides to go for a very conventional kind of climactic cliffhanger that you've seen in a lot of different kinds of movies that punctuate a lot of action movies, and it's a really, really lame note to go off on.
I disagree with you here because I think...
Because it does go into my... Sorry, let me finish. It does go into the themes of sort of the paterfamilias and the family dynamic, but it's such a pat rousing finale that it becomes boring.
I disagree with you for this particular reason. I think it's, when you look at what this is on some levels, a post-apocalyptic movie. Most post-apocalyptic movies are really desolate. They're all about the destruction of society, of interpersonal relationships, of humanity itself, at least as a concept, if not literally as a species. And I think, in the end, A Quiet Place isn't trying to be pessimistic. I think it does have conviction and a certain faith in, for lack of a better word, the human spirit,
our ability to survive.
Yeah, I think there's a certain positivity to that, and I honestly think that has real value in a time when people feel a real sense of foreboding about our future. So I think having an ending that does, lifts you up as opposed to brings you down, which is probably the more natural extension of the narrative. I think that serves a function, and I think that makes you leave the theater going, "Oh, that was cool," as opposed to, "Oh, I'm sad." Like, I think the movie is trying to be a drop your popcorn, jump out of your seat movie more than anything else, and I think it proves that by the fact that it's not about much. I will say the thing that kind of bothers me more about the film isn't that it really isn't about much, because I don't care if it does what it set out to do, and it set out to be a good horror exercise, and I think it succeeded. There's a lot of refrigerator logic.
Don't think about how
really
what the monsters are, where they came from,
well, even beyond that,
how all of this came to be. Also, why the family didn't do X, Y, or Z to protect themselves. They could have done a lot of other things to protect themselves, which they don't do.
In case you're familiar with the term refrigerator logic, I don't know if Hitchcock coined it, but I think he popularized it. He did the MacGuffin.
Yeah, the refrigerator test.
The idea is, you're watching a movie, you're engaged in the movie, and you're just excited to follow the movie, you enjoy it, and then after you get home, after you you've started putting the movie out of your head a bit, and just sort of thinking about all the little details, you go inside of the refrigerator to get a drink or a sandwich, and you realize, hey, wait a minute, if Marty McFly is in a new future and he doesn't know his whole family, isn't that a tragedy and not a satisfying ending? Well, yes, but while you're watching it, it's incredibly satisfying. And the Back to the Future is the best example of that, because it took people decades to pick up on the fact that didn't make sense, because the movie handles it so well.
You're still so high on the movie that you don't start to pick apart the logic until you get home and look in the fridge. Hence the name, the refrigerator test.
Most movies have something that falls apart if you think about it too much. The real question is the movie not so good that you don't care? Or is the movie so bad or so mediocre
that's all you can think about while you're watching the movie?
You're distracted and you're thinking about all the problems. This is a big part of being a film critic. If it's entertaining, you forgive a lot of flaws. If it's not, you don't. And for me, I didn't think about any of these things until at least I got in the car afterwards. And I'm hey, wait a minute, no one tried blank before? Like, literally no one? Like, it took, by 90 minutes into the movie, I thought it seemed pretty obvious. And, this is, 400 days later, no one thought, okay, no. All right, it's fine.
They have... Here's the bit of logic that I noticed right away. And maybe I just wasn't as wrapped up in this because... I don't know. I couldn't say why. But they have a soundproof room that they live in. They're sort of looking for survivors using radios and video monitors. Why don't they live there?
or another thing that they deal with, and this isn't a spoiler because they show it early on, and actually it doesn't really pay off very well. They live next to a river with a waterfall. And that's where they get a lot of their food. They fish. And...
They can make noise next to a noisy river.
Because that's a constant thing of noise, and the monsters actually avoid that because it's so loud.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you live next to the river?
Or just have a white noise machine always going, you know?
Yeah, there's all kinds of like really like good ways around this if you really thought about it. But again, it's the Gremlins test. You know,
Yeah,
like you can pick apart the rules of Gremlins all you want, and it's fun to do so.
Well,
but ultimately, you like watching Gremlins so much, you don't care that water supposedly makes them multiply, but they're playing in the snow the whole time.
It especially with Gremlins, but with A Quiet Place too, it follows sort of a fairy tale logic.
Yeah, exactly.
It feels a little bit more whimsically fantastical if you really want to put it in a proper context. The problem with a lot of the horror elements of something like A Quiet Place.
Can we say grimsically instead of whimsically?
Grimsically, sure.
Okay.
If you're going for a monster movie, is that they're trying to go for kind of a realistic tone. They're looking for like what are the actual practicalities of living in this quiet world. They have to spread sand, who knows where they got it, over every path that they walk on, and they walk around barefoot because their shoes would make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And they try to dampen their footfalls by putting sand everywhere. So yeah, they're sort of thinking out, you know, they get food from this river because it's noisy and the creatures don't go there. So they are trying to put together some logical things, like actual practical living arrangements for this monster movie. And it's kind of hard to fold a fairy tale construct into that. And I am a fan of magical realism, but you have to do it just right. And
I think they made it so about the immediate moment that the characters never ask themselves these questions, therefore we don't, because we're invested in the suspense. There's a really depressing but very good Todd Solondz film called Wiener Dog. And it's a series of short stories or short films, and they're only connected by the presence of a wiener dog. And Danny DeVito plays a screenwriting teacher in one of these shorts, and it's my favorite short in the whole lot. And this has nothing to do so much with the plot, really, but his writing advice is actually very good, and I thought about it a lot when I was thinking about how Quiet Place was constructed. The writing advice is the simplest and best. What if, and what then?
Yeah, then what?
What if and then what? Yeah, exactly. What if, then what?
Yeah,
so you ask yourself a question. What if there were monsters that were all over the world and they attacked you if you made any noise whatsoever? Okay, then what? A Quiet Place is then what?
Yeah.
It doesn't ask any questions about what before. It's just like, we like this concept, let's not think about it too much, and enjoy the aftermath. And the aftermath is a really great time at the movies. Yeah. I've heard people comparing this to Get Out, and I think that's really thin. I think there's a lot of superficial similarities in that it's an actor turned director. It's a horror movie that comes out at the beginning of the year. It's critically acclaimed. It's making a lot of money. It's from Blumhouse. Okay, all of these things are true. Get Out is a film of great complexity and of real depth. And A Quiet Place is not. I think any depths that are there because the acting is really, really good.
Yeah, I think
but it's just a really good popcorn movie, whereas Get Out, it's the difference between The Exorcist and like Friday the 13th Part 2. Like Get Out is The Exorcist,
both
this is Friday the 13th.
films.
They're great films, but like they do very different things.
If you want to compare this to a recent horror hit, I would go to It. The Stephen King movie, in that they both know how to wield monster imagery to a very effective degree when you're out at the movies.
See, I would have gone with Don't Breathe.
If you're with, Don't Breathe as well, which is very similar.
It's a very gimmicky one. It's very high concept. Actually, a lot of it is just intensity.
I actually like Don't Breathe way better than I like A Quiet Place. A Quiet Place is just fine. Don't Breathe is pretty badass.
It's really scary.
Yeah, it's actually
a really
kind of
scary
frightening.
movie. That one will linger with you, I think, a little longer than A Quiet Place.
Plus, that one has like underpinnings of like economic crisis and crumbling cities, and it's actually takes place in the modern day.
There's more
also kind of a post-apocalypse vibe to it,
but in the real world. But yeah,
but I feel like it is a pretty shabby film when it comes to like its themes and its ideas. But when you're in the theater and you're surrounded by 100 other people who are all like, "Oh no, scary clown!" It's actually kind of a fun time.
And that's a really valuable thing. I think sometimes people, once they start like appreciating more complicated and more
nuanced
horror movies, they start rejecting those boo scare kind of movies. that's a skill in and of itself. And A Quiet Place is one of the better ones in a really long time. I highly recommend it. Let's move on.
Okay.
Let's move on to Blockers, the other big release this weekend.
Big studio release.
Blockers is a broad comedy about 3 teenage girls who decide they make a pact. They're all going to lose their virginity on prom night, but it is also about their parents.
But it's more about their parents.
But their parents wouldn't have a story if it wasn't for the teens, so I started there.
Fine.
Okay, but it's also about their parents who find out about this pact and decide to do everything in their power to make sure it doesn't happen, mostly because they're wildly insecure.
Yeah.
The parents are played by Leslie Mann, who is a national treasure. John Cena, who is just getting funnier and funnier. Like, I never thought I would really look forward to seeing him in movies, but now I'm totally there. And Ike Barinholtz, who I've seen in other things before. He was in Neighbors 2, and this is his best bit. I think he actually has the best of the adult characters in terms of...
Well, it's because he's the only one who understands what's going on here.
Yeah.
John Cena is incredibly insecure about his daughter having any semblance of sexuality whatsoever.
And indeed of just not being perfect. He's raised her to be an athlete, to go to a great college.
And he's not comfortable with letting her go out and just sort of make her own mistakes.
He's a very conventional, stereotypical, likable, but overprotective dad.
Yeah. We've seen this type of character 100 times.
Hundreds.
Adam Sandler has played this character at least 50 times. I'm thinking of Blended in particular.
Hell, look at Hotel Transylvania.
Yeah, even Hotel Transylvania.
Just dads who are overprotective of their daughters. It's one of the oldest tropes in this kind of movie.
Leslie Mann plays sort of the not as overprotective, but more doting mom who is staring down the barrel of empty nest syndrome.
Also, she's a single mom, and she's really nervous that her daughter is going to make the same decisions that, she loves her daughter, but at the same time, having her daughter really narrowed down her life choices, and she wants her daughter to have more options than she did. And then Ike Barinholtz is the black sheep of the parents. When we meet him at the beginning, he's, everyone loves each other, everyone's real good friends. When we meet them in high school, he has long since cheated on his wife, been ostracized from everybody, has barely talked to his daughter in a year or two, and he shows up at prom night having bought them a limo. He's not rich. He spent a lot of his own money on this. It's a sacrifice because he's trying to ingratiate himself back in that clan, and he's actually trying to be very understanding. So when the parents find out through just seeing text messages on a computer that pop up,
they snoop, and here to the film's credit, the parents snoop. They try to stop their daughters from having a good time. They are not respective of their privacy or of their life decisions. These young women are 17, they
or 18,
or even 18.
Yeah, they're graduating.
Yeah, some of them might even be legally adults at this point, and the parents are doing everything in their power to undermine their free will.
Yeah.
And that is a horrible thing to do. It's disrespectful to the girls. It's not even a moral thing to do by snooping through. And on every turn, every time they make a really bad decision, Ike Barinholtz takes them to task for it in the moment.
The majority of the first half of the movie, he's actually trying to stop them.
Yeah.
Actively trying to stop them. And then something happens and he starts actually being worried that his daughter is about to do something she's really going to regret. Because his daughter, and he knows this even though she hasn't told him, his daughter is gay.
Yeah, that's established right away.
Oh yeah, this isn't a spoiler or nothing. She's gay, and she hasn't told her friends yet. She hasn't told her parents yet. He knows because he's her dad, and he loves her and he's paid attention. And he said, I haven't told her anything. It's her decision to make. She's going to come out. She can come out
when she comes out. Yeah.
Very, very respectable point of view. And then he finds out that she's feeling pressure to try to have sex
from her hetero friends.
From her hetero friends to try to have sex with a guy. Now, they're not forcing her to do it. She just feels like she's being left out and she has to do it. Or that she has to do it to know for certain if she's gay. And he thinks that's a major life mistake and he wants to try to stop that. He is also wrong and she also needs to make that decision for herself. But they try to get him on board with the whole shenanigans. My problem with the movie... First off, I'm going to make this allowance. It's very funny.
Yeah.
And I'm willing to forgive a lot of things if your movie is very, very funny. And indeed, there's a couple of bits that don't land. There's a couple of bits that are gross for their own sake. And there's at least one scene with Gary Cole and Gina Gershon that I honestly feel crosses the line and goes into, I do not approve of this being in the movie. However, just because it's such a different morality scale than everything else that's going on. It feels meaner and grosser and just doesn't belong in the film. It's one scene out of an otherwise very, very funny comedy. My problem with the movie is the movie admittedly does know that what the parents are doing is wrong. And I'll give them credit. They learned that lesson over the course of the film. The problem is that they drive the movie. And what they want to do is so bad, just bad parenting, just so disrespectful to teenage girls who we spend a lot of time with, and they're great characters. They're all really well written. They're all really likable. There's a lot going on. They all have their own reasons for making their own life decisions, and all of them are doing it just about right, or at the very least, respectably. And I don't want the parents to succeed. I want the movie to stop them. And as a result, I'm kind of mad at the movie for starting out at such, especially considering that one of them flat out says the moral of the movie, like right at the beginning. And it's just, if they had all and you watch the movie and you realize that the parents had actually just followed his advice, stayed home, got a little drunk, commiserated about losing their kids, and come to that conclusion on their own without doing things like take a beer bong up their butt.
Which happens.
The movie would have ended basically the same.
Yeah.
And that kind of bugs me a bit because I feel like the journey we only went on because the movie thought them being shitty was more likable than it was. I didn't like them for that. However, it was funny, so I'm willing to forgive it a lot.
I don't think the film is trying to make them likable, and I don't think they're necessarily even saying that the journey is the thing they needed to come to their conclusion. I think this is one of the better studio comedies on this topic that I've seen.
The topic of sex, or the
topic of parenting, parenting teenagers.
Okay,
and specifically parenting teenage girls. I'm thinking of Blended now. That really horrible Adam Sandler comedy. You know that one.
And honestly, that's not even the worst Adam Sandler comedy. It's not even the worst one,
but I'm thinking of, he has a teenage daughter in that movie, played by Bella Thorne, and she's kind of a butch jock. By his design.
The idea is he's a single dad, and he's raised her the way he would raise a boy.
A son. And he works in a sporting goods store. He's pushing her always to be more sporty, and she's actually an accomplished athlete, but she's reached a point where she wants to be kind of girly. And that film's kind of gross because it reinforces like two opposite ideals, and I'm not really sure what it's trying to say in that movie.
Sure.
But when she finally appears that film's one funny moment, Bella Thorne appears in like this really lovely gown. She's looking kind of womanly for the first time in her life, and there's 3 musical montages. The boy who has a crush on her has this big romantic song playing over, like, as he stares at her and she walks in slow motion.
80s romance ballad.
It's like, lady, from the moment I saw it. Anyway. I won't sing Lady. Then we have Drew Barrymore, the person who was helping her, and it's sort of this kind of, I am strong, I am invincible, I am woman. And then we cut to Adam Sandler, the father, and it's The End of the World as We Know It by R.E.M., and that's kind of a funny gag.
That's a funny joke. Not gonna lie.
They do it twice, it's less funny the second time.
Yeah.
But we are faced with this very cliched Hollywood character, this dippy dad who doesn't understand female sexuality, who is really uncomfortable with not just their own child having sex, but with sexuality in general. This is a film where we have that type of character, this dippy dad.
Mostly the John Cena character.
Mostly the John Cena character, who also has kind of a sporty daughter who is expressing sexuality for the first time. The daughter is played by an actress named Geraldine Viswanathan.
Yeah.
And keep an eye on her, because she's a star.
She is to this movie what Tiffany Haddish was to Girls Trip. Everyone is good in the ensemble comedy. She knocks it out of the park. She's great.
She's going where Emma Stone has gone. Keep an eye on her. But he finds some like sexy underpants that his daughter owns, and finds something that he thinks might be a sex toy early in the movie, and turns out the gag is that it's a toothbrush,
which was a funny gag.
It's a funny gag,
yeah.
But he's
overreacting to everything.
The way he shifts around uncomfortably, sets him up in this really kind of cliched way that we've seen in movies like Blended, and throughout the movie, this character is like being taken out of those Hollywood cliched movies and is being told by much more realistic, much more pragmatic people that form of thinking is wrong from square one, and your overreaction is dumb. And it schools him constantly and gives him good lessons constantly throughout the course of the film. Every single scene he decides to choose and, continue to pursue his daughter and foil her, her plans to lose her virginity, he's the one who has to kind of squirrel around the good decision.
Yeah.
And it feels like the Hollywood machine is trying to undo this character that it has, put in the stock drawer for so many years, and teach them that this is not bad for a young person to be having sex on their own terms.
Okay, I love it on a meta level. I totally do. As a comment on the genre itself, I totally agree with all that. And actually, one of my favorite scenes in the movie isn't even the funniest scene. It's the scene where they realize that the kids, they thought they were going one place, they go this other place, they don't know where that is. But it turns out that John Cena's wife, who is a confident, smart, wonderful human being. I like her character a lot.
Immediately takes him to task.
Well, it turns out she I don't know if she's like an interior designer or an architect or something, but she had something to do with the house that they went to. I didn't pick up exactly what her name was. But the one is, she would have the address somewhere in a Rolodex. So they go back to his house to get it, and then she's up, and she's like, what the hell are you doing? And they tell her, and she immediately gives them a long speech about why kind of the whole premise of the movie is bullshit.
Yeah. I love that.
I love that too, and I think it plays better than other things I've seen. Like, I saw, did you see Sex Tape?
I did.
Okay, so it's the whole point of Sex Tape.
Sex Tape is pretty dumb bad, but
I've seen worse, but it's not good. And
that's an average fest movie right there.
There you go. Jason Segel and Cameron Diaz, the gag is they made a sex tape. It accidentally gets uploaded to the cloud, but the cloud is linked up to a whole bunch of iPads that he's given away as business gifts. So they're trying to get everyone's iPads and turn them off. Towards the end of the film, someone asks him, hey, why did you just delete it off of the cloud, which is a thing you can actually do, and you didn't have to do any of this stuff? And they're like, oh, dope. Yeah. And that's a punchline. This isn't a punchline. This is a conversation that they're having in Blockers, where she's like, our daughters are not like these obstacles, or they're not to be controlled. They are making decisions. Female sexuality is not a bad thing. You would not be having this conversation. We were talking about your son right now, which he doesn't have. But that would not be a conversation you have. You would not care. So you're all being horrible. And then while she's giving that speech, Leslie Mann is just like, so you get the address yet? Got it! Yeah. And the gag is they're going to do it anyway. And I think we're supposed to want them to go on because it will continue to be funny. I just want them to learn the lesson. So maybe I'm being a little impatient with the movie, but that was my only real complaint with it.
The joke is, the movie is sitting us down and telling us why this type of premise sucks, and why all of the movies that have this premise before it all suck.
Yeah, from American Pie, she's out of control.
And nobody's listening, and finally, it's the chance for these characters to sit down, knuckle under, and finally face the music about what kind of horrible things they've been perpetuating in Hollywood movies for years. I think it's actually a really savvy send-up of a lot of that, and I think that's really important. It's directed by a woman.
Yep. So Cannon, who wrote the Pitch Perfect movies. Yeah, this is the third one, but the first two are really good.
This is her first film as a director, and she is clearly the one who's calling up all of this, because she's turning the girls into complete human beings. I have a feeling that if it was a man directing, they might be more on John Cena's side. That's
the horrifying plausibility. It probably would have.
I can't say a man, but maybe just a less graceful director.
When you look at the movies that we talked about that take a similar approach to parents or teen sexuality that are gross, the majority of them are made by men.
Yeah.
Whatever, you could say it's just the perspective that comes from every storyteller brings their perspective to that story, whether they're trying to or not. It seems like she has some real thoughts about it. And one of the best things about this movie, which there are a lot of good things. When I criticize it, it's a critique. It's a minor critique. I'm glad we have the movie. One of the things this movie does that feels so effortless when this movie does it, but it's impressive because you realize how rarely it's done, and rarely it's done this well, really tackles consent. Well. These girls, they talk to their dates and their boyfriends. They talk about what they're cool with at the beginning. Geraldine Viswanathan, her character is going to drink and do drugs tonight. She's going to like smoke pot, take hash brownies or whatever. But she has a conversation with the guy she's dating beforehand. No matter what happens, just want you to know I want to do this. And the guy is like, okay, we'll see where it goes.
No.
Like even he's still super cool. And like when someone,
he's super cool to the point of being kind of clueless about it.
A little bit,
she expects him to react differently, and that he's actually kind of cool.
He's actually fine.
It's a little refreshing, but also funny.
And the way that all of their storylines with their the men that they're planning to have sex with play out, one of them has second thoughts, and the dude is like, "Okay, cool, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's totally, hey, that's great. Let's want to hang out."
And
that's it. And that's great. That's such a great behavior to reinforce.
One of them has a really awkward sexual encounter that goes to a really gross place, but it's not about humiliating either of them.
Yeah, it's just an embarrassing moment.
It's an embarrassing moment. They both realize it in that moment. Wow, this is like horrible. Yeah, you know what? It's cool. We can survive this. They laugh it off.
Yeah.
This is also the second mainstream Hollywood comedy I've seen that celebrates a gay kiss.
like heroically.
Heroically.
I've seen that. I feel like I've seen that in more than one.
I feel like it's so rare, and that we have it in some. And this is not necessarily for kids. It's rated R.
It's very rated R. This is very
lot of full frontal nudity, but just something that is this kind of blatantly mainstream that has such a casual celebratory approach toward teen gay characters is great.
So great.
Again, I'm not a big fan of Love, Simon as a film, but I appreciate what it does more than I like the movie.
That's fair, and I honestly think I like Blockers a lot. I think there's a couple of things that don't work super well in it. I think one of them is kind of endemic to the premise, and they do a really good job of playing with it, but I think it's worth pointing out. I think there's just one scene that tips over into a little despicable. But it's a fine line to walk, and they fell over the wrong side.
The idea is these are people who are uptight about their sexuality, and they find people who are a little too open about their sexuality and the discomfort that comes therein, and they get involved in the sex games in a way that just doesn't. It's more uncomfortable than it is funny.
It's meaner, and it's kind of doesn't have the rest of the film's message to it, and I wish that scene were handled differently. I really do. It's one scene in an otherwise very well handled movie, and I think that's okay. I think it's okay to say that this is a really great, funny movie with really entertaining performances, a really sweet cast, a lot of really genuine, tender moments in it, and like one scene that kind of sucks. And I think as long as we're just willing to say, and that's a thing, cool.
Yeah.
Because Blockers is quite good.
It's quite good.
Good for that. Good for everyone involved, honestly. And seriously, like, regardless of like whether this is your kind of humor or not, every performer in the movie is bringing their A game to it. Like everyone, like we didn't talk enough about Leslie Mann, who is just extremely funny.
We've known for years how funny Leslie Mann is, and I think she's appreciated enough.
She should be a huge star.
She should be a bigger star.
How many films has she like starred in? Like like a top 2 build. It's like This Is 40, which is bougie as fuck, but actually a very amusing little movie. Yeah. If you can forgive just how 1% everyone's problems are that they're making a big deal out of. But she's really good in it. And this, and I'm trying to think if she had been like, am I forgetting something? What was
the one with Kate Upton, and she had the cheating husband, and like all of the mistresses got together to. Was that Leslie Mann?
I don't actually know which one you're
talking
movie. About. I don't know that one.
It's a movie that sort of slipped past my brain.
I'm used to seeing her in supporting roles, and I'm really, really glad that she is taking the lead. And I think she was in 17 again.
Oh,
like that, which is actually a good little movie. I like that movie with Zac Efron, where Matthew Perry becomes 17 again. Like it's way better than you'd think that movie would be.
Probably because of Leslie Mann.
And Zac Efron, he's a charming dude. She's fantastic.
John Cena is proving to be like a comedy powerhouse in a way that I don't think anybody really expected. He was great in Trainwreck as the man who was so narcissistic that he could only
George of the Jungle.
Yeah, George of the Jungle. She started in George of the Jungle.
Yeah.
That's where I first noticed her.
That was her big role, yeah.
John Cena couldn't climax in Trainwreck unless he was like talking about himself and working out, and that was kind of hilarious.
He steals that movie. Like he has one scene and he's so good. Or 2 scenes, but he's so great.
He steals the scenes he's in, and here playing that sort of dippy dad who's the hamster wheel in his brain isn't spinning too quickly. And
well, he's not stupid. He's just set in his ways and very conventional. There's a bit where he keeps running into teenagers with man buns, and he's super confused because he's got like basically a crew cut, and he says, "My hair is too long." Like that, he's very set in what he thinks sort of roles should be.
There was a way of playing that character as sort of more sympathetic. Where we're more on his side. And he is able to embrace the foolishness of his character and still have him be completely lovable.
Well, what's interesting, what I love about him...
And it's still plausible that he's willing to butt-suck beer for this cause.
Well, the cause is problematic.
This despicable cause,
well,
yeah.
You know, here's what they do that's so clever. Because so many characters in movies, even good movies, are kind of have tunnel vision. They're kind of only about whatever they're after. He is interested in other things. One of the things we talk about at the beginning of the movie after we cut to the kids in high school, after we meet them when they're young and the parents meet for the first time, is the parents have kind of drifted apart a bit now that their kids are older and they're not doing play dates together and shit. And he's talking about how Leslie Mann is like, she's worried she's going to die alone and stuff. He's like, I call you. Oh. And he's not calling her to cheat on his wife or anything despicable. He's calling her because they're friends, and he wants to make sure she's okay, and he wants to hang out with her because he likes her, and it's strictly platonic. We like him because he has positive qualities that maybe they do, maybe they don't make up for the despicable things he thinks at the beginning and that he learns a valuable lesson about by the end. But they show that he's more than a cliche.
Yeah.
He's a character who has feelings. He loves his wife. He loves his daughter. He loves his friends. And he's also made some stupid hypocritical decisions, and the movie takes him to task for it, and that's fair.
Yeah.
That's great. Anyway, I like this movie a lot. I reserve a little bit more criticism for it than I think some are, but yeah, it's really funny, and you should totally check it out. And then lastly...
But the best movie of the week...
Holy shit, this movie is You Were Never Really Here. Now, this is opening in limited release. I think it's going to expand eventually.
It's a sequel to I'm Still Here. No, I'm kidding. This is the fourth film from Lynn Ramsey, who previously did, in 1999, did a really terrific film called Ratcatcher. She followed it up with another pretty terrific film called Morvern Callar with Samantha Morton. Then she did her most flashy film, We Need to Talk About Kevin.
Which really isn't that flashy. It was just the most easily sellable.
Compared to the three, it is certainly... And this one, too. It is the flashiest.
And We Need to Talk About Kevin, I think, is often a rather misunderstood film because it was kind of treated as, oh, God, what if your son was a sociopath? How horrible would that be? But it's actually a very nuanced look at that relationship between a mother and a son and the mistakes that they both made that led to a really horrible situation. She is a very devastating filmmaker who does not let her characters off the hook and is willing to explore some of the really dark recesses of the human mind.
No, We Need to Talk About Kevin was many years ago at this point.
Like five or something.
Yeah,
5 or 6.
It's been a while since she's made a film. She was attached to a couple along the way.
Well, she was going to make Jane Got Her Gun. She was with Natalie Portman.
And she walked off the set of that one. She was attached to the Lovely Bones for a second.
Oh, I would have loved to have seen her version of the Lovely Bones.
And that would have been great instead of the piece of garbage we got from Peter Jackson.
I like that movie more than you do, but yeah, her version would have been epic. Her version would have been amazing.
Most people's versions would have been better than what Peter Jackson got us, because that's
been 7 years since we need to talk
7 years since we need to talk. So she hasn't made a feature. She's made a lot of shorts, but this is her first feature in a while. And this is yet another film that she has made about just brokenness.
Yeah.
Ratcatcher is about kids, and it's about sort of teetering on the brink of being broken or living in a broken world. Morvern Callar, very much like this one, is about a woman who her boyfriend commits suicide, and she doesn't really seem to acknowledge it. He's dead, so she just goes out partying, gets home, he's still dead in the apartment, eventually kind of cleans it up and just doesn't tell anybody, and you're wondering what's going on in her mind. And, We Need to Talk About Kevin is a different animal. But
I think it still qualifies because a lot of it is about Tilda Swinton kind of ruminating on what led to this situation, and it has broken her, and it's saying how she got that way.
And it's more about her. I think Kevin is such a caricature in that movie. He has no depth whatsoever. He's just a ball of evil.
I think the reason for that is we're seeing that from Tilda Swinton's character's perspective in a lot of ways, and we see that a lot of the issues in that movie stem from her undiagnosed, untreated postpartum depression, which she actually gave that child no affection.
Yeah.
And so he became the way he is for a reason.
But-
I think
well,
you're giving it a very superficial read.
Well, even from day one, though, like the kid is punishing her for not being wanted. It's with a slight tweak that could be Tales from the Crypt.
Agreed,
you know?
but I think she tweaked it.
Okay.
I think she tweaked it the other direction.
But now we're up to You Were Never Really Here, and we enter in on the Joaquin Phoenix character's life. Joaquin Phoenix plays a man who's kind of depressed.
Oh, way to undersell that. One of the things that we see him repeatedly do is idly try to kill himself.
Yeah, like he's in one early scene, he's seen sort of wrapping plastic around his face in a closet.
Yeah.
He's living with his, not infirm, but a mother who is in need of help daily. He does odd jobs, and it turns out he's a thug. He's a killer for hire.
Well, he's a killer for hire, but he does only do it for good reasons. And what we find out that he does, and what's a really great opening here, where we see him cleaning up blood and like hiding jewelry and like all this kind of stuff. And for like a good chunk of the movie, and this is on like the IMDb page, so I don't think it's bad to ruin you. So for a good chunk of the movie, you're not entirely sure if he's just a homicidal maniac or not. Like he comes home and his mother is like watching Psycho, and they're talking about watching Psycho, and you're just like, okay, I see where we're going here. But it turns out what he does is he actually tracks down missing girls and kills the people who kidnap them.
Yeah.
That's what people pay him to do. But what that opening does is it sets the tone, which is that living a life of violence, not just he experienced trauma as a child, and we never quite go into it in too much detail, but it's very horrifying what we see that did happen to him.
Lynn Ramsey gives us a series of flashbacks that I think each one is no longer than a second and a half. We get tiny little flashes of what happened. We see something happen in combat with him, so he has some soldierly PTSD. We see flashes of what happened when he was a child, why he has certain habits, but it's not explored in any sort of trite or predictable way.
But they never just flat out tell the story. It's not like, and here's what he's all about. These are the images in his mind. These are the incidents in his mind that are always there. And even if he has led overall, as I think, honestly, the film probably wants us to believe, a relatively decent life, given the the line of work he's in, he is an open wound of a man. And it really calls into a question.
But he was an open wound years before this film began.
Yeah.
Now he's a scab that is a little bit infected.
And I love Joaquin Phoenix's performance. It reminded me of his performance in The Master, which is very much like a universal horror monster. Like he's very arch and very weird, and like you can tell everything he's done has been adapted in order to live in an environment that has no place for him. Here, everything about his character just screams, "Do not touch." He's a porcupine as a man. Like he's got this big woolly, stay the fuck away from me, I'm a crazy guy in the woods beard. He's muscular, but there's no attention paid to whether or not it's attractive.
He's not cut, he's just big.
Yeah, like he's very quiet. He's super intense whenever he does talk. Whenever he does talk, he says weird shit that makes you really uncomfortable. Like he is really, really, really everything about him is a defense mechanism. But like my point is that everything he's been through, and what he's been through is shit we've seen in other movies. Like Sylvester Stallone has gone through shit he's been through.
Yeah.
And he would deal with it unflappably and just be a badass and flick the cigarette out of his hands as he blows people up, and he'd be like, "Ha, I've done the right thing."
And there'd be like maybe one scene of angst where they're sitting at a bar like taking shots, and that would be a hard job. But then he'd turn into a badass. And I feel like the instinct for this kind of film is to really romanticize the pain. Whether or not it's seen as tragic or heroic, that pain is seen as something that makes somebody overall kind of stronger and makes you an important person.
Yeah.
This film rips the romance off.
Oh my God.
Throws it in the bin and says, no. Bad
other movies. Like, because seriously, Joaquin Phoenix in this movie, everything that he has seen, and it's again things that other characters in other movies have seen, has had an emotional impact on him, as it would. And just that alone, just the impact that every plot point in this movie, whether it happens on camera or off, has on him and one other character, every single one of those things is so powerful and so impactful and has just resonates with them in ways that you don't want it to, but they're very real. That the movie needs about 1/3 the plot of any other movie. Because really, it's actually a very simple narrative. He is hired to find a girl. He finds the girl. Bad things happen. Worse things happen. He has to deal with a situation. One of the best endings of any movie I've seen in years. That is everything on cue cards. That is the movie in a nutshell.
I'm reminded of Travis Bickle from Taxi Driver.
I've heard this comparison a lot.
Because Travis Bickle it does lose his mind. He begins getting this skewed view of reality. He begins to get a skewed view of himself. Roger Ebert pointed out that in the famous scene where he's looking in the mirror and says, "Are you talking to me?" Everybody says, "Are you talking to me?" That's the line they quote. Roger Ebert focused on the line that came thereafter. "There's no one else here." There's no one else there, Travis. It's just you. You're creating this big drama. And, his big goal at the end of that movie is to rescue a young girl from a brothel.
I feel like his big goal in the movie really is to prove that he was there, ironically.
Over the course of the years, however, I've noticed a lot of people, critics and just audience members, romanticizing that quest. Because in his mind, it's this kind of Quixote-like thing that is a thing of heroism.
But you gotta realize, what he almost did was kill a politician.
He almost killed a politician. We see that it's really horrible, and it's supposed to play like a tragedy, but
I think
people get so deeply inside Travis Bickle's head that they actually are able to romanticize Taxi Driver, which is a freaking disturbing movie.
I think
it's not a romance at all.
I think that means sometimes the movie is better than it should be because we're seeing it from his perspective, and his perspective, he's the hero of his own story. Which is why
audiences, I think, are taking the wrong thing from that.
I feel the same way about Fight Club. If people think Fight Club is cool, all of those people are monsters. That's the point of the movie.
Fight Club is a satire. It's a satire. Yeah. It's making fun of them.
All of those things that they're doing are terrible. The movie knows this. Weird. It's
one of the best.
That's misinterpreted.
One of the best satires that people don't often know is a satire.
Predator is another one. It's Predator is a satire. And people are like, oh, where's that from? It's from the commentary track. The director said it. It's not even like... this isn't like some film critic thing coming afterwards. Like, all of these things are in the text. And I think You Were Never Really Here is so much clearer about that. I think it's going to be real hard to misinterpret this.
We see him go on a similar quest to rescue a girl from a brothel. That's the plot of the movie. And... the consequence, we do see things from his perspective, but it's not this sort of skewed heroism. He doesn't get involved in any sort of romance. There's no romance. It's just the ugliness of it and the consequences of it. And when we come to the end of his story, we realize that nothing's changed for this guy.
Yeah.
At least not in any kind of significant way, and I think that is such a powerful message. I wish I could describe the final scene.
Oh my god, the last scene is everything, and it's worth getting through. Honestly, a lot of this movie is hard to watch because it is very violent, and it very much understands the consequences of all kinds of violence, all of them.
It also deeply understands depression in a way that mainstream Hollywood doesn't like to even look at.
The title, You Were Never Really Here, is probably his mantra. This is the story of a guy who, even though he does things which, again, they're violent and they're horrible, but they have positive consequences, at least the ones that we see. He's basically convinced that if he wasn't there, nothing would change. And everything would go on without him, and nothing would matter.
And that is one of the most common psychological underpinnings of suicidal depression in humanity. That the world would be fine without you. That's the excuse of the suicidal mind. It's like, I could just go and no one would care. And
I'm just going to say right now, we will care.
Yeah, no,
we will care. These are very, very common concerns.
No matter where you are, someone cares, and few filmmakers can deal with this really well. Lars von Trier's all over this crap.
Lars von Trier's more cynical about it than this, though, because I think even though this is about that pain and it captures that pain and understands that pain and it wants you to feel his pain, whether or not you've felt this before, this is a movie that very much reminds me of one of my favorite movies of the last few years, Christine, which is also about suicidal depression. I feel like what this movie also understands is that feeling like you have a reason to be here is reason enough to go on. Like, there are scenes early in the movie where he's like doing something like will kill him. Like if he just like releases like his fingers, he'll die. But then his mom calls and says she needs help in the bathroom, and he's just like, well, not today.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. Like, it's just a matter of finding reasons to go on. And the movie understands how important that is.
Yeah, it
for someone who is in that mental space.
In that mental space, and how it can just be a bridge from like 1.5 hour segment to the next, and finding those moments can keep you going. Luckily it doesn't romanticize it. It's not going to say, and this will solve everything. It's just going to be about that struggle. And
to say there's an excuse or an explanation, or that doing this will solve his problem, would have been so cheap. It would have made the movie suck. It would have made an otherwise brilliant movie suck if they had gone for that ending. And they don't. And as someone who has had some very dark times in my life, I gotta tell you, man, this movie gets it.
This movie totally gets it. We've all had the darkest of the dark moments.
Sure.
Yeah, it's part of being a human. And yeah, this is a film that's not afraid to explore that and present it in a very understanding way,
but in a way that is also pulpy and exciting too. It's crazy. The plot, the plot is a pulp movie plot, but it finds the humanity in it in a way that is just really incredible.
Yeah, it's really great. I don't want to say too much more because I'll just give it away.
Well, again, there's only so much to give away. That's my point. Is the plot's very straightforward.
All three of the movies we reviewed this week are 90 minutes or less, and around there,
hovering around 90 minutes.
Keep on.
That's a good. You do not need. Most movies don't need more than that.
No. John Waters is very on. He very deliberately makes his films about 90 minutes because he thinks that's the ideal length for a feature film. I feel like so many films feel the need to clutter up everything with a lot of extra plot to make it interesting that now we have like Disney animated features that are nearly 2 hours long. It's like no, just. Strip away a lot,
I think,
and you can get a much more efficient, much tighter, better film. I'm thinking of Frozen.
Sure.
Which is a weird thing to bring up right on the heels of You Were Never Really Here.
But we're talking about running times.
But Frozen has a long introductory sequence, then it has another introductory sequence, then it has the inciting incident, and about halfway through, the plot finally kicks in. It's like you don't need any of that. You can strip away a lot out of something like Frozen and get a tighter film that actually can focus on what it's truly about, rather than putting that in a whole mix of other things covering all your bases. You don't need to cover all your bases. Just say the one thing strongly, and you'll be good.
Well, I think that there's a mentality here.
There's no confidence in the filmmakers.
I think there's a mentality here on the part of some audiences, and we saw this come up when the news broke. But the information was released that Justice League, before it came out, that it was going to be 2 hours long. I think it's 121 minutes exactly. And people were mad. Because people were just like, wait a minute, we're only going to get 2 hours of movie out of this? This is the Justice League. It's got like 7 main characters, other supporting actors. Like, I don't want only 2 hours of this. I want to get my money's worth out of this thing. And I understand where that mentality comes from. However, Justice League, for all its flaws, packs a lot of movie into there. A lot of movies.
You and I are like some of the few defenders of that movie.
It's shabby, but it moves, and there's a lot of fun stuff in it, and it's really cool in a lot of places.
It's shabby, but I think the shabbiness is kind of the thing that makes it watchable in a weird way.
My point is that 2 hours, you can fit a lot into 2 hours if you pace it well. You know what other movie is 2 hours, like on the dot, or like I think it's the exact same. Excuse me, I looked it up. The exact same running time as Justice League. Star Wars. The original Star Wars. You're telling me there wasn't enough movie in Star Wars? They did everything in Star Wars. They went to different planets. They blew up a Death Star. All kinds of shit happened in that movie, and it is densely packed. Say what you will about Justice League. It's densely packed. You can cram a lot into a movie if you understand how pacing works. And I feel like a lot of movies feel like they're kind of hedging their bets and wanting to really fill things out. And it requires a lot of confidence to cut a movie down to its essentials and say, this works. And not every movie does that. I think we're finally moving on from that period where every comedy did that, where every comedy had to constantly digress for 5 fucking minutes to beat a joke to death.
The Apatow school of
even Paul Feig does this a lot.
Comedy editing.
Like The Heat is a good example of this. That's a funny movie with a really good cast, and man, it is 45 minutes too long. It is just the plot just dies so people can riff forever. And it's a shame because otherwise I think that'd be one of the better buddy comedies in a really long time. But it just pacing matters. And all of the movies this week, and I'm just going to say right now, they're all C+ movies.
They're all C+.
They're all
movies.
C+ movies.
These
for
are all
us.
good films.
One, I'd say You Were Never Really Here has a real good chance of making it on our best films of the year list.
That's a reasonable assumption.
It's too early to say that with it's one of the best movies of the year. We don't know. However, if there are 10 better movies than You Were Never Really Here this year, it's going to be a great fucking year.
Yeah, I like Blockers more than you. I think you like A Quiet Place more than me, but I'm not going to slam A Quiet Place.
They're all movies you should see.
Yeah, just a great watchable horror film.
Yeah, it's a really good week at the movies.
Yeah.
Really good week. That's great. I love that. People oh, critics and ripping on things. We want every movie to be good. You know why? Makes our job a lot easier. Makes our job a lot easier.
It's easier to be legitimately excited about stuff than have to manufacture your enthusiasm. Or
because other people can see a bad movie, realize 20 minutes in that it sucks, and get their money back. We got to sit through the whole goddamn thing every time, man. Granted, there are harder jobs, infinitely harder jobs, but who doesn't want a good day at the office, right? This was a really good week at the office for us. So let's.
Speaking of good and bad weeks at the office, let's move on to our main feature. This week, the critically acclaimed poll for April Fool's Month was one of the greatest of all silent movies, and
we had too many to choose from. Narrowing it down to 5.
Narrowing it down to 5. We
left out Charlie Chaplin and Buster Keaton on purpose, just because they're one of the.
They're too obvious, essentially. And
admittedly, there were some other obvious ones on the list,
but the silent film era. Cineasts are all over it. People who study film know silent film. They can distinguish, between the director's styles and sort of the birth of a lot of important cinema during that time. And it's still something that is frustratingly underseen by, I guess, younger audiences.
And to be fair, that was true in our generation.
That was true in our generation after generation. This is consistently true.
And I think part of that is only reasonable. As art gets older, it loses an audience, and we see that in everything. There are a lot of books we still read from the 19th century. There are fewer now than there were in the year 1900.
I'd say people are still reading Dickens. For
they are,
sake.
But my point is that there were also a ton of other books that didn't make that transition.
Okay.
We lose things over time as people lose interest or availability weakens, and with silent cinema in particular, it's a problem because it is silent. It's not as actively exciting and engaging to the mind, and people don't air it very often. They don't play it on TV as often as they used to. You don't just run into it randomly the way you used to.
Also, the language of cinema has evolved so much in the intervening century since that really important era of filmmaking that a younger audience member who's only been raised on newer films won't recognize what's going on. And in order to really understand it, and this message goes out to the people who have ever said, I don't get silent films, or I don't understand what's going on in these movies. If you start with kind of a steadier diet and you see what's going on and you get used to that language, then you'll understand it a lot better. So you do kind of have to give yourself a diet to really get it, as it were.
And that goes beyond silent cinema because styles change. And not just styles of, say, synchronized sound or not synchronized sound, or color or not color, or really fast editing or not really fast editing. Acting styles change.
Yeah.
Some of the best performances ever given were given at a time period before what we now call method acting, which was very naturalistic. So you compare everything from, say, before On the Waterfront to after On the Waterfront. These styles of acting are very, very different, and these things change over time.
Well, I would have said Mary Pickford, but yeah.
Well, but there are multiple touchstones. I think On the Waterfront is a very well-known example because that was what really shot Marlon Brando and Eva Marie Saint and that style of acting into the mainstream.
Yeah.
And so, the naturalistic acting we have now in our dramas is very different from the style of acting we had in serious dramas from the 1930s and 40s. Are they better? No. Are they worse? No. They're different. And when you only see one of these every couple of years or something, it's going to seem so different that I totally get that it's off-putting. But there's a lot that you can miss if you don't immerse yourself. Silent cinema, in particular, I think is really interesting in how rarely it is screened now, because when you think about film history, and I'm not talking about really deep, rich, look into the tomes, learn all the history. I mean, just look at it in the vast swaths. It's about 125 years old, and about 30 years of that were silent. That's about a quarter of movie history was silent. That's a lot of it.
And
that is not being paid attention to by a lot of people.
Yeah.
So you're missing a lot of stuff.
If you are a horror fan, if you like every film that Blumhouse puts out, if you go out to see things like It and A Quiet Place in the theaters, I would say that you not only do you owe it to yourself, but you may even be being irresponsible, sir. If you're not familiar with Nosferatu, Nosferatu came out in 1922. It was the very first popular Dracula movie, but thanks to rights issues, they couldn't call the Dracula.
Yeah, the makers of the film was directed by F.W. Murnau, who is one of the great filmmakers of the silent era.
Friedrich Wilhelm Murnau.
Apologies for my pronunciation.
This is hardly your picture anymore, Murnau. Oh, sorry.
Fair enough. Regardless, they wanted to make a Dracula movie. They didn't get the rights to Dracula. So what they did was everything in their power to tell the story of Dracula, but not tell the story of Dracula. So the bullet points of the story are basically the same.
Oh, they're identical.
They're basically the same. They changed the names of some characters. They cut some stuff out. They added a few little things here and there. The monster looks a little different. And they changed the way vampires die. And this is very, very important. Whenever people complain about like the mythology of fictional characters like vampires, you have to laugh. If someone's like, oh, vampires, oh, I can't believe they shimmer in Twilight. Vampires don't do that. You know what else didn't used to happen? Vampires didn't used to get killed by sunlight. Nosferatu invented that in 1922.
Well, and here's the thing.
Werewolves didn't used to get killed by silver. The Wolfman invented that.
Yeah.
These are all things that were made up in movies.
Well, Max Landis has a really funny bit in his Death of Superman video.
Oh, yeah.
Where he's
talking to his dad.
John Landis has a funny bit where he says, how do you kill a vampire? Oh, well, stake through the heart, sunlight. And John Landis says, no, you can kill a vampire however you like because vampires aren't real. You can it's all made up.
But they promised they didn't make up enough of Nosferatu because they were sued by Bram Stoker's estate. Bram Stoker's estate won, and they ordered all prints of the movies destroyed. And it's a miracle any existed, but I'm really, really glad it did.
We're glad it did because this is one of the friggin' scariest movies I've ever seen. It's like a nightmare.
But I think it's something interesting. I read Ebert's review of this in his great movies list, which, by the way, if you want to really catch up on great cinema, just look through Ebert's great movies.
Ebert's great movies.
He wrote about them in a really accessible way. It's really great. One of the things he talked about in terms of Nosferatu is the idea that Nosferatu was a horror movie. It wasn't the first horror movie by any stretch of the imagination, but it does precede what would come to be known as the tropes of the horror movie. So this doesn't have jump scares. This doesn't have a lot of blood or gore.
And you can't do that in cinema without sound. You can't have that big banging noise or something leaps out at you.
It doesn't work the way you expect any other horror movie to do. And even something like another silent horror movie, for example, which is just even more outlandish than Nosferatu, The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, which is one of my favorite silent films. It's so enriched in this. They're both German expressionist films, but Cabinet of Dr. Caligari is so much more ethereal and bizarre in its construct in every single way.
The sets are all just like weird angular things, and the shadows don't make any sense.
Every single thing about it is trying to unsettle and scare you. Nosferatu, lots of it plays like any other movie. And then something unnatural happens, and it's wrong.
Then we get really close to the vampire itself, and Nosferatu, played by Max Schreck, who is an actual vampire. If you listen to the movie Shadow of the Vampire,
which is based on urban legends, which were bullshit, but they're fun to think about.
And it's kind of easy to believe when you look at the guy because he looks like a rat. He has this gaunt, becoated thing. He has gigantic ears and huge, elongated nose and big little buck
sunken eyes,
deeply sunken eyes.
Tall as hell. Like he's just an unnatural figure.
He looks like you would catch the plague if you were to touch him.
Yeah,
and when that thing is on screen, you realize that the world is not right. This thing doesn't belong here. Yeah. It feels unholy. And that's kind of the point. He is so bad as to be opposite of nature. He doesn't represent death. He represents the thing that doesn't belong in the world. And we talk about how sunlight kills vampires. He walks around during the day in this.
Well, I think that was actually like a problem with the filmmaking. They were shooting day for night, and they got a lot of shadows.
So, but
because
we took that
in the later editions, they tinted the film to sort of fix that.
We took that to mean that it's a biological thing. Like vampires are vulnerable to ultraviolet rays, and like we have later movies where people are like holding up sun lamps and burning vampires. Like no. The point of that scene where he's finally vanquished by the sun. I'm not giving anything away. This movie's from 1922.
Also, it's the plot of Dracula.
It's also the plot. Yeah. So the way the vampire is vanquished at the end of this movie is he is lured by innocence. This young woman represents a purity of thought and a resoluteness that this unholy thing doesn't mesh with. And she is able to essentially seduce the vampire into staying pure. He stays by her side and doesn't touch her until morning light, and he realizes, oh crap, this night of innocence has undone, like this one shred of innocence has invaded my soul, and that's the thing that kind of destroys him.
Death by metaphor.
Exactly. It's paired with the metaphor of the rising sun. So it's not the sunlight that's burning through his body.
And the idea of innocence is really important here. I think when you look at Bram Stoker's novel and many of its other adaptations, there are films that are very much about the sexiness of temptation.
Sexual purity.
Not sexual purity, but I think also just the appeal of sexual deviancy. The necrophilia or
wickedness in general, but yeah.
But like Bela Lugosi, he's become like a cartoon character, his portrayal now. But you look at that original film, he's hot. He's an appealing,
the sexy older aristocrat who has
another
money
country
from
with
another
an amazing
country,
accent,
with great clothes. He wears a cape. I mean, we think of like the vampire cape as just sort of standard.
Yeah.
But
he invented
Bela
that.
Lugosi, the cape was like the cape came back very briefly in the Frank Langella Dracula, where he comes in, he's got the cape on. It's like, oh look, he's a Dracula, and the first shot, he walks across a room and he whips the cape off. And he kind of throws it to a butler without looking at the butler. Is like looking at, I think it's Mina in that scene. He's just sort of marched. And we realize, this is just like a really cool, exotic Eastern European piece of clothing that makes him look more aristocratic rather than vampire-like.
I'm going to throw it out there, by the way. Maybe it's not the best Dracula movie. Frank Langella, sexiest Dracula. Who's the sexier Dracula?
It's debatable, but yeah. I might say Bela Lugosi, but maybe I guess you can't really see that anymore.
I know a lot of people would say Gary Oldman, but I will take the Pepsi challenge between Frank Langella and Gary Oldman. Frank Langella is very alluring in that movie. This is not a sexy Dracula, but like that's my point. The other Draculas,
this is disease rat Dracula.
The other Draculas are appealing, and you're supposed to get why people would like want to be with them and fall prey to his charms. Nosferatu is actually a very kind of overt moral parable, and what happens is at the beginning of the movie we see they change the name, so you can they're the Harkers.
Jonathan Harker and Mina
Harker. And like we see them, they're married, and they are blissfully happy. Oh, darling, I'm so happy. Like they're so happy. Like
anyone for tennis.
It's like the beginning of Reefer Madness. Like it's so perfectly happy that you don't even buy it. But that's the point. They are idyllic. And then what happens is he is tempted with money. They said, hey, this Count Orlok, they changed his name to Count Orlok. Count Orlok wants to buy an estate here in our town. Go and get all the money. And he's like, wee! And he's like running through the streets like he's got a golden ticket, or like Bilbo Baggins has decided to go on an adventure. And everyone's like, whoa, what you doing there? And you realize that he is so excited at the prospect of avarice, one of the 7 deadly sins, which are name-checked in this movie, that he is throwing all caution to the wind. And then when the locals tell him, don't go to Count Orlok, don't go to Castle Orlok, or whatever the fuck it is, they're evil. He's a vampire. Here's a book about it. He looks at the book and he goes, Count Orlok and the 7 deadly sins. And if you, for 7 deadly sins, you'll meet Count Orlok and he'll drink your blood.
And in a show of pride, he laughs at the book and throws it away.
Yeah, like it's not subtle storytelling. It's effective storytelling, though.
Well, silent cinema isn't subtle. That's the thing.
Mostly. They have to tell each other their stories in broader strokes. But what happens is, in a dreamlike story like Nosferatu, totally works. Every single, it still holds up in every single way because, again, this is a moral parable. When he goes and he follows his fate, he follows his sin right to Count Orlok, everything is immediately shit.
No.
And indeed, as soon as he's there with Count Orlok, and as soon as he is like they're signing the contracts and everything, his wife starts having psychic visions of horror.
Yeah,
because he has just signed away everything
to a monster.
He signed away himself. He's signed away his neighbors because Count Orlok is going to come. He's going to bring, and this is an interesting addition, a literal pestilence, like a plague of rats. This is something that in Werner Herzog's really excellent remake of this from 1979, I think.
I think
it's
74,
really,
but yeah.
Is it 70s or else? It's a really great movie. He really loves that plague. The swarm of rats in Herzog's version are that's the scariest part of the whole movie, just the pestilence and the grossness. But here he has brought horror onto the world by being selfish. And as a result, it kind of helped codify one of the most important things we see in the whole horror genre and film and everywhere, really. The sin that is disproportionately punished. Most horror movies begin with someone doing something they're not supposed to do, and then horrible things happen.
This comes straight from Bram Stoker.
Sure. But I'm saying Nosferatu zeroes in on that.
That's the central theme of the film, for sure. But I think that's kind of the part of Dracula that people kind of overlook. That the evil can't get you. You're not just sort of going about your day and the evil just grabs you. That's a serious man. That's a Dybbuk. That's old boy. You're just walking down the street and all of a sudden you're punished for no reason.
Well, you're punished for something. You're punished for a reason. Yeah, but old boy's a bad example. I see what you mean.
But for him, he doesn't know. And Bram Stoker has said that you can't suffer the consequences of evil unless you welcome it in. And there's a line of dialogue in Dracula, the novel, says, "Come into my house of your own volition." He actually says that to Renfield when he first comes in, or I guess it's Jonathan. Come on in of your own volition. You are choosing to enter the realm of evil. And that's also something that you see like in movies as late as The Lost Boys. The vampire can't come in unless you say, "Come on in."
Yeah.
Let the right one in has a title about that. And
you have to make a conscious decision to make a pact with the devil. Yeah.
Your choice to not live a moral life on any kind of level is is an invitation for ruination.
And I don't mean and when we say any kind of level, we don't mean you're living a horrible life in every way. One way. One mistake.
One
sin, one thing can follow you and destroy you.
So you have to be really careful. Now that's
a scary thought.
It's a scary thought. Now a lot of people will kind of bristle at sort of the Christian moralizing aspect of that, but at the same time, it's true. I mean, you can make one bad mistake based on selfish reasons and ruin your life and maybe ruin the lives of many other people. Yeah.
It's a scary thought, and Nosferatu is a very literal version of that, which also uses surreal imagery to make sure this is the ultimate nightmare. And some of the imagery in this movie is indelible, and it's indelible for a reason. The probably the most iconic shot in the whole thing.
The shadow on the staircase?
Yeah, so, it's towards the end of everything, and the Mina character has decided she is going to potentially sacrifice herself in order to end the horror of Count Orlok. And Count Orlok lives across the street. And he sees her from the window, and he's gonna go for it. And it's kind of like that long walk across the street from Halloween, where Murnau just really plays with the suspense. So Count Orlok disappears from the window. The door opens of its own volition using trick photography, and Orlok just sort of floats everywhere. And then you see just his shadow, his unearthly shadow, with his claw-like long fingers, just floating up the staircase. And it is creepy as fuck. It's creepy in a vacuum, but in the context of the story, it's terrifying. Yeah. It's great.
And the design on Count Orlok is such that you read all of that immediately. There's no ambiguity. There's no ambivalence. This is a thing of pestilence. As I was saying before, this thing doesn't belong in this world. And sometimes, so every time you see it kind of floating around, it's like this is a rupture in moral reality, in reality itself.
And I think there's this temptation oftentimes to make monsters really alluring. And I totally get it, because often, temptation, sin, bad decisions, whatever, it can be alluring. However, sometimes a thing is exactly what it looks like, and people do it anyway.
Yeah.
That is true. Like, if you think about, it's hard to get to like young adulthood and not know that cigarettes are bad for you. People still pick up smoking.
Yeah.
They know it. There's a warning label on the box. You shouldn't do that. It tells you not to do that. And people still do it sometimes. This is actually like this. Yeah, it's surface level, but it's still a good warning. Count Orlok, again, he's just like, stay away from him. Look at how horrible he is. And yet, he's got a lot of money.
He's got a lot of... You go in there anyway.
You go in anyway.
No matter how strange he is, he's going to lure you with greed. He's going to, promise you riches.
Yeah.
And the ultimate moral message, luckily, for a film like Nosferatu, which could have ended very cynically.
Oh, very easily.
It could have been an apocalyptic film.
A lot of German expressionist films do. Because
Dr. Caligari has a great twist, which I'm not going to reveal.
Arguably the first twist ending in movie history.
But that Mina is able to chase it away and is able to realize that her moral standing is greater than that of the moral rupture, then you leave with a little bit of optimism. I don't care about sort of...
1 second. Quiet Place.
Quiet Place did it in a dumb way.
But my point is that's why they did it.
I know why they did it. I just wish they had been graceful about it.
Fair enough.
This one... I don't care about sort of the fate or the happiness of the breeding couple in the center. They're kind of boring characters, except for Mina's moral insistence. It's her heart, and I want to say purity. That's not quite right.
Well,
I think it's how resolute she is in doing the right thing and putting herself at risk.
Her character, I think, boils down to it's a silent movie, so there isn't like a lot of dialogue, but they do have title cards. If you're not familiar with how silent movies work. So if there's an important line of dialogue, they put it on a title card. One of the first lines of dialogue in the movie is when her husband loves his wife so much, I've brought you this bouquet of flowers. And her line is something to the effect of, you killed them.
These are just going to die in my house now.
How could you kill these poor flowers? She doesn't see... She doesn't care about, like, getting things. She just cares about decency. Yeah. And that's the lesson we all should learn more of. And that's good. Regardless of religion. That's just a good thing to be. Is a better person.
She acknowledges the presence of death, which is something that greed, the deadly sin, doesn't do. Greed is about acquisition. It's about having things forever.
Well, that's what all the deadly sins are.
You lose it. Well, yeah.
All the deadly sins are about something that you appreciate more than actual
living. Yeah. That's the whole point of the deadly sin. It's not that they kill you. It's that they're the things standing in your way of
living a fulfilling life,
fulfilling, happy, righteous life, And again, that's not even, honestly, that goes beyond religion. Like, if you have nothing, but if you value pride above all things, you're missing a lot of the things that you'd have if you had some humility. Yeah.
That kind of thing, you know? Yeah. Nosferatu is a classic, and it's a classic for a damn good reason, and I think there are a lot of silent movies out there that if they were your first... I'm actually glad you picked this one. I think it's a good choice, because I think there's a lot of silent movies out there that if you try to jump right into them... If you're new to silent movies, you might not know where to begin with it. Like, you look at something like really complicated, like Intolerance, which is this weird triptych of like different stories and different timelines and how they have different parallels, and it's a really complicated narrative. And God help you if you look at your phone during it, because you will lose sight of everything going on. It does not work. The comedies tend to last real well for that reason, because comedy, it's slapstick comedy, so it kind of transcends everything. You don't need the dialogue, and everyone can sort of appreciate it because we grew up with Looney Tunes and shit. But the horror genre in the silent era, there was a purity to it and also a real experimentality to it that really because all of the tropes and the trends that modern movies play off of now didn't exist. However, there's a double-edged sword to that. Because Nosferatu was so influential, so significant, and indeed Dracula was as well, that we've had about 1 billion adaptations of Dracula. In fact, last I saw a statistic on this, Dracula was the most commonly adapted fictional character in all of cinema. like between him and Tarzan.
I heard that him, Tarzan, and Sherlock Holmes are like all neck and neck. Tarzan less so these days. We don't see too many Tarzan movies.
Tarzan's fallen off in the last few decades.
Sherlock Holmes is on TV all the time. We see Sherlock Holmes every day.
But there's like a new Dracula movie. Like if you look in every alcove and like straight to video or TV or whatever, there's like a new Dracula at least every year, often more than one. And so we've had a lot of great ones and a lot of shit.
We've had about 80 to 85% total garbage that you don't need to pay attention to.
However, there's so many that still leaves a lot of great Dracula movies. So you can look at all the Christopher Lee ones to one level or another.
Most of the Christopher Lee ones.
They're all fun.
By the time they're like snorting powdered Dracula blood, it kind of falls off the rails a little bit.
That's a good one.
Taste the blood of Dracula.
The best part of all the Christopher Lee ones were all the crazy ways they had to resurrect Dracula on each one.
Yeah.
Because they never had like a mechanism for that. So they always had to make up some stupid bullshit. So it's really great. Again, I think the Frank Langella version is underrated and really, really great. But what happened was you had a lot of them that are just bullshit cash tie-ins. Now,
because the character's in the public domain, you can do whatever you like.
Yeah, now he is. At the time, they could sue the pants off of Nosferatu. Now he's in public domain. And one thing that happened in the year 2000 was a movie called Dracula 2000.
One of many films with 2000 in the title in the year 2000.
Yeah, and were any of them good? Like Blues Brothers 2000 sucked. This sucked.
Godzilla 2000 was okay.
Okay,
it wasn't great, but it was okay.
Fair enough. That's better than this. Like
Pokemon the movie 2000.
I pushed for Dracula 2000 because I consider it such a horrible sellout movie. There's like a couple of good performances in it, like actors who bring something to it, but it's so stupid and so like just tactlessly pandering to what they thought was an MTV crowd. We'll have a cool soundtrack, so who cares if the movie is good? We'll change a bunch of things in the mythology.
Gerard Butler played Dracula in that one.
Yeah, and it was not good.
I watched that on DVD, and then I watched the special features afterwards, thinking it couldn't possibly be this bad. What were they thinking? And they had Gerard Butler's audition tape, and it is a marvel.
Was he good, or is it just...
Well, just he saunters in looking like the douchiest douchewaffle you've ever seen, with like big, long, wet curls, and he like... I think he himself decided to put dark makeup under his eyes to make him look more Dracula-like. He's like, I am going to drink your blood. It's like, oh, shut up. Get this guy out of here.
Seriously, though, I'm gonna have one last digression. Who's the worst Dracula you've ever seen in a movie?
Oh, golly.
Because I got mine.
That guy from Blade Trinity.
That's him!
Yeah.
Dominic Purcell. Dominic Purcell. Not a bad actor. Not a Dracula.
Not a Dracula.
At all. He looks so out of place.
He looks like an out-of-work porn star in that movie. It's just terrible.
He's so bad. I love him on Legends of Tomorrow. I love him in Prison Break. He's a fun actor. Totally miscast in Blade Trinity. It's hilarious.
It's a terrible Dracula.
So Dracula 2000 was terrible, but it made money. And it spawned a straight-to-video sequel called, I think it was just called Dracula 2 Ascension.
Dracula 2.
And honestly, I'm going to tell you right now, as straight-to-video Dracula sequels go, that one's not as bad as you'd think. Like, it's got a couple of clever ideas in it. It's not terrible. And then
they did Dracula
3000.
No, Dracula 3. And then they did Dracula 3000.
Did they skip right to 3000?
Yep.
Wow. Okay. I thought it was just boom. Dracula 3000.
No, there's also a Dracula III.
Okay. Now, there's this trope about, like, when monsters go to space, it's always terrible. Not necessarily the case. Sometimes it's just campy and fun. Jason X, campy and fun. I like Jason X. Jason X is a fun watch. Critters in space. A lot of people lump that one in, like, oh, isn't it sad that Critters went to space? Critters were from space.
They're aliens.
That one made sense. That was fine.
Leprechaun goes to space. Whatever.
It was stupid, and it knew it was stupid.
Brian Trenchard Smith knew what he was doing.
Hellraiser went to space. Not as bad as you'd think. Not great, but not as bad as you'd think.
It's not the central premise of the movie.
It's like this bit of it. Like that was meh. Dracula 3000 is stupid as fuck. Dracula 3000 takes place in the year 3000 and is basically Event Horizon with a Dracula in it.
Well, it's
Event Horizon with a Dracula in it.
Yeah, I guess you're right.
Okay.
But less creative or interesting or well-made or inoffensive or...
they shot in like what looks like an abandoned factory and told you it was a spaceship.
This movie is like lip-smackingly cheap. Like there's some something...
and that it was probably made out of lip smackers.
Yeah, maybe like they were glued together with chapstick. There's something a lot of low-budget movies do to make them look interesting, and that is green light. The green gels light the back wall, and it adds a little bit of color. I appreciate the effort.
Bless you.
But it is a clear sign that they're covering something up when they bathe the backgrounds in green light.
Okay.
Casper Van Dien plays Captain Van Helsing. Captain of a spaceship. Oh God!
It's okay. Okay. I'll take us through the bullet points.
They're looking for the planet Transylvania.
They're not looking for the planet Transylvania.
The galaxy transsexual.
They never go to the planet Transylvania.
No, they don't go
there.
They
go close. They actually go to like the Carpathian system. Where a ship, the Demeter. Which was the name of the ship that Dracula and Count Orlok, I think it was even in Nosferatu. The name of the ship that Dracula...
The Demeter, yeah.
Yeah. The ship that Dracula took to his new home.
Now, it's pronounced Demeter, right?
I thought it was Demeter. That's
Demeter?
the name of the god.
Okay.
I thought that was a classical reference.
I always thought it was pronounced Demeter, the name of the god.
Maybe we're wrong.
All right.
In any case...
The characters all pronounce it differently in this movie,
in any case, it's a ship that has gone missing for about 100 years. And it's popped up on the radar, and they're a salvage crew, and they're gonna like go scrap it and make a lot of money. So we got Casper Van Dien. We got Tiny Lister, who played the president in The Fifth Element. He was
Zeus in No Holds Barred, one of the best movies ever made.
No Holds Barred is great.
No, it's not.
It's very entertaining. Can we agree on that much?
It's like rubbing your face against a sweaty thigh. It's just terrible. And not in a sexy way, either.
So he's in it. And Erica Liniak from Baywatch fame, and I think she was also in Under Siege.
Yeah.
She's like the second in command, and there's a couple other people who you don't recognize.
There's Coolio.
There's Coolio as the stoner.
And his name is 187.
And
evidently he's like this brilliant doctor who destroyed his mind with future drugs, and now he's just sort of on weed the whole time.
Yeah. So they go onto the ship. The ship's captain was Udo Kier, and he left behind a bunch of video logs, which are very scary, or at least that's the basic idea. If it didn't look like Udo Kier literally FaceTimed his performance and...
all of his lines are delivered to the camera with the same background behind him, delivering all the lines in sort of the same cadence. Udo Kier is an actor's actor. He will sell whatever garbage he's in, and he's been in a heck of a lot of garbage.
Hell, he's probably been in mostly garbage at this point.
He's played Dracula, for goodness sake.
And a good movie. It's Blood of Dracula. It's great.
Warhol's Dracula.
Warhol's Dracula, yeah.
Blood for Dracula.
Blood for Dracula. Yeah. Sorry, that's where I got that confused.
And he also played Dr. Frankenstein. He's
great.
He's great. And even when he shows up in a garbage film, he's always selling it. And he's not sleepwalking through anything. And he sells his role as somebody who's in one room and clearly is only shooting for like 4 hours. It's like, here's your lines, just read them off the paper. Thank you. Here's your $1,000. Go get a sandwich. So
the ship
so when we cut back to him, there's this weird sort of credibility that is way beyond the trash that we're watching.
Yeah. So what happens is that they find out that everyone on the ship is dead. The ship is full of coffins, and there's actually like a couple of like cute ideas in here where like
for a sci-fi version of Dracula.
There's like a couple of ideas here. I'm just like, you almost had a movie here where the idea is that religion has been outlawed in the future, and a lot of these concepts are totally alien to everyone in the
they have to figure out what religion is and what these rituals meant.
There's a halfway funny joke where they find Udo Kier's plastic skeleton, which I guess he was made of plastic. Who knows? It looks the cheapest skeleton I've seen in so long, and he's like still holding a crucifix in his hand. And everyone's like, what's that? And I thought this was like, it's a plus. No, Coolio's like, it's a plus sign.
He must be really into math.
Yeah. And then someone will say, it's a crucifix. It was a thing. It was legalized. It's a problem. Vampire lore is gone as well because I guess they got rid of all of the boogeyman. So they have to come up with this stuff on their own.
And this is the only interesting concept they could have played with here, because I feel that vampires only really work if you have the religious aspect kind of folded in. They need to be unholy, and you need to have something holy to counteract that.
Yeah. There's actually a fair number of vampire movies that play with the idea of like, oh, you have a crucifix, who gives a shit? You don't believe in God.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter.
Fright Night points that out. They say it doesn't really matter what the symbol is. You have to have faith in that, and it's your faith that's kind of counteracting this evil that's coming after you.
The problem with a lot of
it's when they start putting
lore,
holy water in squirt guns that it kind of falls apart.
Yeah, like the problem with a lot of vampire lore is everyone got hung up on the nuts and bolts of it, and they missed the fact that it's all a metaphor.
Yeah.
Or at least the majority of it is. Like the stake through the heart wasn't a metaphor. The stake through the heart was a practicality. Stake through the heart wasn't supposed to kill the vampire. The original idea of stake through the heart is it kept the vampire in place while you cut his head off.
Nails you down. Yeah,
that was the idea behind that. So
not like wood penetrating the heart does something magical.
So they let loose Dracula.
Anyway,
I'm sorry. They let loose Dracula.
And he's boring, and he's barely in the movie.
Worst Dracula. He's worse, almost worse than Dominic Purcell.
Well, I mean, he's just a boring non-presence. He's not scary at all.
He looks like he got his costume from the closest costume store to wherever you are currently standing right now. like the best one they have. Too expensive. Next best. I'll take that. Yeah. That's what he's got.
He got the best. It looks like one of those prefab costumes you get out of a bag. Yeah, and it has a big.
It reads Dracula, but not a good one.
A big dumb collar, and that's kind of. I think he's got like a T-shirt on underneath. He's just totally lazy, and he ends up biting Coolio and realize that Coolio is kind of the Renfield of this story.
Yeah, and Coolio gets to overact, and Coolio starts jumping around, flapping his hands, starts rapping as he's like coming towards you to try to kill you.
Says really offensive things to the women.
Well, frankly, people were doing that already, and that's one of the things that makes this movie kind of gross from scene one.
It's really super misogynistic.
The idea behind it is that these are all blue collar, shitty job.
Yeah.
It's a boys club with like a couple of women in the crew.
It's aliens. It's the truckers, the marine types.
Yeah, and indeed one of the characters is actually named Ash.
Oh yeah.
And guess what? That one's a robot. So they saw some movies, and they had some fun putting in a few references, and I'm sure that's what kept them from being bored to death. But yeah, there's a lot of grossness to it. It's a lot of prurience. And
Tiny Lister like assaults one of his coworkers right away, and
first scene, and he's the hero.
And he ends up being the hero of the story, and he doesn't learn a lesson. In fact, he's rewarded in the most disgusting way possible. And I'm going to tell you how this movie ends because you shouldn't watch it.
It's a bad movie.
See
Dracula 2000 just because it's stupid bad, but not and see Dracula 2 Ascension because it's got a couple of clever ideas. Do not see this.
We have Van Helsing, and who's killed off screen, if I recall,
in a way that almost is supposed to be clever. We killed Van Helsing, and everyone else says, "Okay, you got something."
Casper Van Dien plays Van Helsing, and you think it's going to be like in all the other Dracula stories, Van Helsing v. Dracula. Van Helsing says, well, I'm Van Helsing. I finally found out what my lineage is. And they look up the Bram Stoker story, and it turns out this is all in the same myth as Bram Stoker's story. It's just thousands of years in the future. And he says, I'm a vampire killer. I'm here to kill you, Dracula. Aha, well, now's my chance to get you. Cut away, and Dracula gets him.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Again, that's almost clever. That's almost clever.
If you think they were doing that purposefully to send it up, it would be clever, but they're not.
I think at 2 a.m. at the Denny's when they blocked out this plot, it was like it was 2 a.m.
High out of their minds on whatever weed was laced with.
They had a yellow legal pad that they just bought from like an all-night Rite Aid, and like a big ballpoint pen, and they're having their moon over my hammy, and they're just still high from getting high in the parking lot, and they came up with, here's all the fun stuff we can put in here. Van Helsing dies, and if someone else has to deal with it, like that was like the clever, like here's how we make this fun and not just stupid.
It'd be cool if Van Helsing just like died. Well, yeah, man, more of those mozzarella sticks, please.
They almost have a moment of genuine humor and cleverness when Tiny Lister and Coolio are finding out about this vampire shit, and they just say like, so his thing is he drinks blood. He's white, isn't he? That's some white people shit. And you know what? He's right. That's some white people shit. Like that's fine. Like there's actual like some commentary here. Like that is not the kind of thing that you would normally see in a story. So that was actually kind of funny.
Yeah, Van Helsing is taken out.
They touch upon something clever.
Coolio is vanquished, and we finally are left with our two surviving cast members. We have Tiny Lister, who's like the big mean truck guy who assaults women and doesn't think much of women. Yeah. And there's Eric Eleniak,
who it turns out was a robot
this whole time. And
I want
she's a very sophisticated robot. And unfortunately, there's never that scene where she like removes her face or
they
something.
Don't have the money for that. I will say this. I'm going to say this right now. Erica Leniak may not be one of the great actors of our time. She's fine. Like she's actually
fine.
Pretty good in this. Like she's actually like
she plays
her role. She plays her role. She brings a little more to it than you'd think. I'm not saying she should get any kind of award for it, but when you're watching this movie, she's something you can latch on to as at least Erica Leniak is doing her job. You know, and I'm going to give her some credit for that because I like her. Like Erica Leniak has the other good line in this movie, and she sells it, which is she's with Tiny Lister, and Tiny Lister is like, you know, we gotta go fight Dracula, and she's like, I don't want to fight Dracula. Like, why not? You're a robot. He's not going to take your blood. She says, he's still scary.
Yeah, that's true. That was a funny moment.
Yeah, that's a good moment.
I don't want to do that because he's still scary.
Yeah.
Then Tiny Lister dispatches with Dracula. Just
kind of unceremoniously.
Just sort of kills him. So not a big climax or nothing.
Not a clever,
big, yeah.
Uh-oh. That's our Dracula alarm.
Smoke alarm's going off. Taken care of? Yeah, all right. Yeah. But he takes care of Dracula. And Erica Leniak steps up and says, well, you know, because I'm a robot, I'm an object. So have your way with me.
But because here's the deal. Hold on. Just what little context there is. It turns out they flew, they're they're gonna like collide with the sun and there's nothing they can do about it.
So they're gonna die.
And he's like, well, there's nothing left and this is sad. And she's like, by the way, I used to be a pleasure bot. You want to have sex until we die? And Tiny Lister's like, yes! And then like it's like the
slings her over his shoulder like he's a caveman.
And it's like, don't you forget about me? He starts playing like some heroic. They don't do that, but you know that's what they wanted. And then the credits. And then after the credits...
There's a little stinger where he spanks her.
Yeah, just like a quick butt slap. Boom. And it's just like, just wanted to be degrading one more time. Dracula 3000 was very obviously only intended to go straight to video. And the market for this kind of straight to video stuff is very immature. If you're renting something called Dracula 3000... you don't think you're going to get something classy, and so they are pandering as fuck.
Yeah.
Say what you will, they know their audience.
They didn't used to be. I mean, they used to be pandering in that, you know, there was plenty of, like, just blood and mayhem and gore, and those are, you know, plenty exploitative. That's the whole genre, exploitation filmmaking. But I feel like it was kind of recent. Like, this was in 2004, and it was around this time when it started to get super pandery, and it got really kind of self-aware in that dumb stoner sort of way. I think they realized that a lot of people who were renting these movies from video stores were stoners, and they decided to make the humor dumber to accommodate that.
I think that had been going on for longer than you think. You look at the history of trauma.
Well,
you know,
Troma's its own animal.
But I think Troma has a target demo, and I think other low-budget, genre knockoff, just in it for some quick money movies are catering to that same demographic. The tee-hee isn't this stupid demographic.
Yeah.
And listen, I get that there's a market for that, but you don't have to do it this badly, this insultingly.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating for me because, again, I'm watching this and I'm like, there's a couple cute ideas in here. Yeah, you could have made a real movie out of this. It may not have been a good movie, but it would have been like a Jason X.
If there was
a Jason X with Dracula,
if there was some earnestness to it, and this is why the appearance of Coolio is such a slap in the face. Like, oh, Coolio's in this movie. Oh no!
And that's not disrespect to Coolio as a person, but like as a movie career, he usually pops up as, oh hey, it's Coolio. Like that's the only thing he's got. Like he's not really like he's never, to the best of my knowledge, really given a serious performance you can take seriously. He's always a cameo.
Which is weird because his biggest hit is one of the most serious hip hop hits like in the genre's history.
I like Coolio's music.
Gangsta's Paradise is great, and he's a pretty fantastic rapper. As a comedian, I want to slap the dickens out of that guy.
He was reading a Dickens book, and you're just like, don't read that. Work on your comedy.
Here, read the Pickwick Papers. That's the one you need to read. I feel like I've thumbed through Netflix before looking for like some cheap exploitation movie because I like cheap exploitation movies.
Some of them are fun.
Some of them are very fun. And I come across something like Werewolf Cop. It's like, ooh, Werewolf Cop. If it was made in 1981, it would probably try to be kind of earnest. Like, okay, it's a silly idea, yes, but we're going to we're aware of how silly this is, and we're going to try to make it look like a real movie at the very least.
Because it took more effort to make a movie back then. It took more money, more technology, and you know, like to actually film something took effort, and you couldn't do more than a lot of takes. So people put a little bit more tender, loving care into schlocky films like this 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah, you can give me a schlocky premise from the early 80s, and I'm going to be all over it because I know of the way the filmmaking worked.
Yeah.
You give me that exact same schlocky premise in like 2016. Like I see, this one was made in 2008. It's like, no, I'm staying the hell away from that one.
It's
because
a good test.
Everything has changed so much.
Seriously, it's a good test. Take any shitty, schlocky movie from the last 20 years and say to yourself, if this was made in 1980, would it have been better? Case in point, you see a movie called Dracula 2000 and it's made in the year 2000, you're like, oh, fuck this. You see a movie called Dracula 2000, it's made in 1980, you're like, ooh,
this is going to be like
this is going to be fun.
This is going to be Albert Pune territory.
Yeah, like that actually sounds like a good idea. Like Deathbed, you make it now, it sounds terrible. You make it in the 1970s, you're just like, oh, this is actually kind of weird. It has ideas.
They tried something here.
Yeah, there's a reason to watch this. It's still bad, but like there's a reason to watch it. And that's a good point. So like we've gone from knockoff vampire movie being one of the best, most influential movies ever made to fuck it, put him in space. I don't give a shit anymore. And that is the gamut, basically. And that's just, and honestly, I don't even think that's the worst Dracula movie, but it's really fucking bad, and I do not recommend it. I actually recommended we do Dracula 2000 because it'd been a more entertaining watch, and you were just like, no, we're making it worse, and then fuck you so much. And for next week, I'm going to exercise veto power on what we do. Our next week, it's your last week to pick a great movie for us to review, and we're going to pair it with the bad one. And next week, your options are all part of the French New Wave. Now,
I know you all love the French New Wave.
Everyone loves the French. A lot of people don't even know what that is. The French New Wave was this period in the 1960s and early 70s.
Mostly mid-60s.
Mostly really late 50s, early 60s. Where a bunch of French filmmakers, many of them film critics, who decided to make their own movies because they were tired of seeing the same things in theaters all the time. So they decided to just break in and they really experiment with the form.
Deliberately change everything.
And we're talking about filmmakers, like film critics who would like write really complicated essays about film theory. Like these are super nerds. And they ended up making some of the coolest, most exciting, most innovative, funniest, sexiest, most musical movies ever made. All of them almost all of them became art house classics, and a lot of them are super fun to watch. So we are going to give you an option of 5
French New
Wave films, all from different directors, and you're going to vote for which one we're going to review next week, and we'll pair it with something really fucking bad. So your options are Breathless, one of the iconic films of the French New Wave.
Often called the first.
I would think it's that or 400 Blows, but anyway. Cleo from 5 to 7. It's one of, I'll say right now, it's one of my favorite movies. It takes place in real time.
I haven't seen it.
Oh my god! Vote for whatever you want, but I gotta tell you,
it's a hole in my education. I've seen Breathless.
I want Whitney to see it. I want Whitney to see it. Okay, Last Year at Marienbad, which we talked about in my most recent movie fights, and it is a film in which two people meet and fall in love, or maybe they didn't, or maybe they never met,
or maybe they're remembering something that happened in the past,
or maybe it's a dream.
It's great.
It's great. Shoot the Piano Player, which is one of the many attempts in the French New Wave to sort of tackle the idea of a film noir in a very unusual way. And then lastly, The Umbrellas of Cherbourg.
A musical.
Which is a French New Wave musical, and oh my god, you cannot watch that thing without getting the theme song stuck in your head. It is really amazing, and it was a huge influence on La La Land, which neither Whitney and I were the biggest fan of, but is not bad enough to be the double feature.
No, we're not going to do it with La La Land.
No, that's just a cheap shot.
If you
that's just making Scott Nance mad.
If you like La La Land, go back and watch The Umbrellas of Cherbourg, and you'll say, wow, La La Land's a big piece of crap.
In comparison. La La Land's fine. It's just got overblown.
It's way overrated.
Anyway, those are your options.
Scott Nance, we're going to have words.
Anyway, those,
on La La Land.
Those are your options. The poll is up now on the Facebook page for Schmoville, Schmoville with an exclamation point. Now, Whitney is once again running up against a deadline, but we're going to make room for one letter.
One letter, okay.
We just did a huge letters episode. Yeah. We need to do more letters regular basis, but we're going to do one letter right now just to keep us fresh.
And this is a fun, silly one. This one comes from Juan. Hello, Juan.
Hi.
Hey, Bibbs and Whitney freaking Seibold.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Listening to your last podcast with Herbie the Love Bug. This is a few weeks ago.
A little while ago.
And I want to take a question you asked one step further. Who would win?
Okay.
Vin Diesel driving Herbie or Air Bud driving the Mach 5?
Ooh. Well, Herbie likes to race.
Herbie's a racing car. Mach 5's a faster racing car.
Mine's a faster racing car. Here's my thing.
Vin Diesel's a more experienced driver, but Herbie does the hard work there.
They're both gonna team up to fight
Dracula.
Who is, of course, driving Undertaker. Was Undertaker the car?
No, Dracula was the car.
Bigfoot. Bigfoot was the big monster truck. Like an evil monster truck. And they're going to defeat that guy, and then they're going to win, but they're going to win when both cars are put on top of each other in like some crazy stunt, and so they all win simultaneously.
And the good guy and the bad guy are barreling toward the finish line. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? And Penelope Pitstop just zips on ahead of them.
Penelope Pitstop, who was, of course, riding Knight Rider.
Sure, why the fuck not?
I do. A lot of people brought that up, though. The idea of like, wait, who would win? Herbie the Love Bug or Air Bud driving a car? And my answer to that is the audience wins because that is great.
Whoever wins, we lose.
That's whoever wins, we win. That is a great movie. I want to see that movie more than almost any other movie that has ever suggested, with the exception of Tango versus Cash. I'm still waiting for Tango versus Cash.
Juan also has a PS. He has a movie pitch idea related to the question. Air Bud, Justice Receiver. Sorry, Justice Retriever.
Justice Retriever.
Air Bud, Justice Retriever. Air Bud gets framed for one of many heists in the world of Air Bud. A high-profile lawyer defends Air Bud for the verdict of royalty. Oh, isn't that cute?
Oh,
that's a reference to our other podcast.
Yeah, another podcast.
Love both your podcasts. Thanks, Juan.
Thank you, Juan. Yeah, we're going to read some more letters next week. But it's going to be a real doozy. We're going to review a French New Wave film of your choice, so make sure you join the Schmoville Facebook page. We're also going to be reviewing the new releases Rampage.
Hooray.
And Truth or Dare, or as it is officially called, Blumhouse's Truth or Dare, just in case you're confused.
In case you were confusing it for the Madonna documentary.
Oh my god, that's probably why they had to change it. That's so stupid.
Like, there are many, many films called Truth or Dare. One of the worst films I've ever seen was called Truth or Dare.
Really?
Yeah, it's called Truth or Dare, A Deadly Game.
Oh my god.
And it was made for a budget of $50, it's just this psycho knockoff of horrible proportions.
Blumhouse did Ouija. Blumhouse did Truth or Dare. I'm waiting for light as a feather, stiff as a corpse.
Stiff as a board, right? Well, light as a feather.
Yeah, like, come on, like every party game. Like, pin the tail on the donkey.
Putting your hand in warm water, the movie.
These are witches' eyes. Ooh.
You put their hand in warm water and they pee demons. You know Jason Blum thought of it. He's waiting till he's dry on ideas.
On that note, everybody, thank you very much for listening to Critically Acclaimed. Don't forget, you can email us, criticallyacclaimedfans@gmail.com. Maybe we'll read your letter on the air. We tried to read as many as we can. We have a big letters episode if we fuck up for too many weeks. We are on Twitter. I'm at William Bibbiani.
I'm at Whitney Seibold.
You can listen to us every week as well on Cancel Too Soon, the podcast where we review television series lasted one season or less. This week, we're reviewing a pilot episode for Alexander the Great, starring William Shatner, Adam West from Batman, John Cassavetes from
everything,
from independent cinema, like one of the most important independent filmmakers ever, Joseph Cotton from Citizen Kane, and they made a sexy Alexander the Great
TV pilot
that went nowhere. So that's a lot of fun. Don't forget, you can check us out all these places, and we'll be back next week on the SK Plus YouTube channel and the Schmoes Know iTunes feed. Am I forgetting anything?
No, I think that's it.
Then in that case, never you forget, everyone's a critic. See, I fed you the line.
I'm sorry.
I want to go to the midnight show. I'm sorry, what?